Today, we're going to be talking a little bit more about technical exercises, and I am going to share with you a wonderful thing I learned from the great and legendary Kevin Hayes. Lots of people consider him one of the best jazz pianists alive right now, based in New York. The great Larry Goldings was asked a question on his Instagram account saying, who are your favourite pianists at the moment? One of them was Kevin Hayes, out of probably like a list of 5. I was lucky enough to have a one-to-one lesson with this man when he came into my conservatoire, the Royal Birmingham Conservatoire in Birmingham, UK, England. I learnt some wonderful things from him, some really interesting conceptual things, and then some, well, the thing we're going to talk about today, which is a really nice little technical exercise. Yeah, let's just get straight into it. It's going to be a short and snappy video, unlike some of the others. I'm just going to talk about this really nice little arpeggio exercise he gave me. Arpeggios, very, very necessary. They're really, really helpful for jazz improvisation. They're a pivotal part of classical piano. They're absolutely brilliant for technique, your ability to just get around the piano, get around all the key centers. You need to just be able to easily do them. But the problem is they get boring sometimes. They do. It's the same with scales. If you're not mixing up the way in which you're playing them, the order in which you're playing them, if you're not setting yourself enough challenges, it does just get a little bit boring sometimes, and then you zone out, and then you don't practice as hard as you could be, as consistently as you could be practicing. That is where this exercise comes in. It basically exercises the key triads in each key center, and it takes you round all these different types of triads, these different 3-part shapes, and then it puts you in the next key, which is a semitone above, and then it puts you in the next key, and it sounds really beautiful. Let's just look at it real quick. So let's just do it in triads. So let's start in C major. We're just playing C major, number 1, C minor, 1 minor, and now we're going to the flat 6 major, so we're just changing one note. Pretty much throughout this whole exercise, only one note changes, apart from one occasion where 2 notes change, and we'll get to that in a minute. And then we're changing 6 major first inversion to an augmented triad, C augmented. It should be on the screen. And then we're going to move the top 2 notes up a semitone to the 4 major. So that's F major, second inversion, 4 major, second inversion, now F minor, and now we're bringing up the bottom note, and it's going to become D flat major, and now we do the exact same exercise in D flat major, so D flat minor, A major, that's the flat 6 major arpeggio. Take up the 3rd, make it D flat augmented. Take up the top 2 parts to make it G flat major, or as it says on the screen, F sharp major. Now we're taking down the top note for F sharp minor. Now we're taking up the bottom note for D major. And then you can understand how that continues through the whole cycle until you've done all 12 and you're back to home. Let's talk about how we can make this into a nice little arpeggio. Let me just start the old metronome. Put it on 100. Go. Okay, so we are playing, if we're thinking of the metronome in crotchets, we're playing in quavers. Okay, let's go through it in arpeggio form slowly, and I'm going to talk about the fingering a little bit as we go through. The finalized exercise is going to be published below this video, so you can consult the fingering there. But I find it's way easier to internalize fingering rather than read it. Or not easier, it's easier to read it, but it's much better for you to internalize it. Okay, so let's start with C major. I've always used rather odd fingering for my arpeggios. Interestingly, my index finger on my right hand is actually like quite a lot shorter than my index finger on my left hand, which is kind of jokes. But basically, I just find it way easier to do my arpeggios starting on my index finger rather than my thumb. I can do both. That's the way that you're taught in, like ABRSM grades and things like that. But for me, I can just feel it better and my thumb doesn't have to move as much if I start on my index finger. So let me just show you with my fingering. Okay, now fingering exactly the same for C minor. Now we're imagining that we're playing an A flat major arpeggio, so your thumb would normally come on the C, because we've got a bit of a rule with piano where you try not to put your thumb on black notes. Within reason, you're allowed to do it sometimes. In fact, it's quite good to be able to do it, but not always. Or you're trying to aim not to do it, basically. Okay, so that's just normal A flat first inversion fingering. And now, exactly the same fingering for the old C augmented. Okay, and now this one, I find it easier to try get my thumb on 1 for F and my index finger on F in the right hand. So now the same fingering for minor. And now we've got to swap our index finger to our thumb, so we can make sure that we can easily strike D flat, because now we're moving up a semitone to D flat. Same fingering for minor. Change fingering for A major. This is just your normal A major fingering, starting on the first inversion. Same fingering for the augmented. Okay, now this one, you have to try swap your thumb down onto the C sharp, because this is for G flat second inversion. There's that, or you can do the same as we did for F major on the previous exercise. Super tricky. F sharp and E flat minor, G flat major and E flat minor arpeggios are just so tricky. In fact, I've never spoken to my teacher about that. I'm sure I am doing the right fingering. I'm doing pretty much the only thing that works, but when you try and take it quite fast, it's always tricky for everyone. And then swap to this fingering for the minor. So your thumb can go on the A. So we've got index finger on C sharp, third finger and index finger in the left hand on F sharp, and now thumbs on A. And now we're going to D major. And for this, I'm using my index finger on 1. That thing I explained to you about how I do my normal major and minor arpeggios, starting with my index finger on 1. This is all optional. I feel like what I'm kind of trying to get at here by individually going through every individual fingering is is basically that you have to be a little bit of a scientist about this. You have to empirically test every single one. You should never take fingering for granted. Everyone's hands are different sizes, different, finger lengths in ratio to the width of your hand. And ultimately, it doesn't, rules are made to be broken. It's your sound, it's your time you're spending at your instrument practicing. So ultimately, it's up to you what fingering you use, and it's whatever feels most comfortable and works the best. So sometimes if it works the best and it's the most logical fingering to use, but it's not comfortable, sometimes we have to take that L. L means loss. We have to take that loss and just roll with the punches. Sometimes we just have to get over ourselves and practice it until we can do it, even if it's a little bit difficult. But in most scenarios, you can kind of be like, oh no, that would be a bit easier if I just do this. And then as long as you practice that and memorize that, the most important thing is solidifying the fingering. So taking the time to decide and then learning it and making sure it's deep in your brain so you don't forget it. I'm just going to play the first two key centers for this exercise at full speed, just as a demonstration to what it should sound like. I'm just going to do it at 100 BPM, not necessarily full speed. And then we're just going to talk about the different intervals we can practice this in. So here's a demonstration just with unison in each hand. And then I can continue through D and then up to E flat, but it's all written out below, and the aim with all these technical exercises is to be able to do them in all keys, because one of my other teachers, Mark Hodgson, who sadly left the conservatoire recently that I study at, told me that you're only as good as your worst key. I think that was the saying. Yeah, you're only as good as your worst key or something. Your playing's only as good as your worst key, as in the key that you're least comfortable in. That's the best you can play in. That key is the best musician you can be. So it's basically saying you need to get up to scratch with all of your keys. Don't neglect any of them because they're all equally important. One day when you're on that really important gig and a singer or a horn player says, oh, actually, can we do that, in F sharp major or something? You're not going to want to be uncomfortable. You are going to want to be like, yes, of course we can. I've been waiting for you to ask me to play that. You know what I mean? I feel like I'm just trying to work out what my worst key is. I reckon it's probably E major. It's funny because it's, you would have thought the keys with the most black notes are the hardest, but actually I just rarely play an E major. It's not really a jazz key. I feel like the main jazz keys are C major, F major, B flat major, E flat major. It kind of goes around the cycle in that order, actually. Yeah, E flat, A flat, and then there's D, the G, and then you're occasionally in A, very rarely in B, very rarely in E, very rarely in F flat, or G flat. Occasionally D flat major, like Stablemates, for example. Yeah, that one's in D flat. And Body and Soul, it's in D flat. So yeah, thank you for listening, guys. Happy practicing. Use this information wisely, and see you in the next video.